Right, let's just do that.
Okay.
So let's call this meeting to order on Thursday, December 5th, 2019. It is 7:31. Roll call, please.
Okay. Director Boyd?
Here.
Director Decker?
Yes, here.
Director Slater-Carter?
Present.
Director Harvey?
Here.
Director Loman?
Over here.
President's statement. A couple comments real quick. One, I want to thank our crew and manager for the lit up Christmas tree in the front. That's exciting, and I want to thank everyone in the community, near and far, for all of their cheerful decorations. It makes December such a pleasant time to be driving around after dark. It's really nice. The third comment is we haven't had much rain yet. And I was just reading giving myself permission to go through old stacks of papers, and I came across a 2004 Stage 5 water alert from Cal-Am in the summer, telling people not to use any water. They could only do certain kinds of water tests on certain days, and brought back all kinds of memories as to why we're sitting here as members of the Montara Water and Sanitary District, because it was in the heat, which sounds odd, but it was in the heat of the fall, so we really were hot and using more water than normal. I will be bringing those in so we can maybe frame them and put a history wall up, to help people remember, and for the folks who are new here to be able to see what we went through.
We bought the water company in 2003, so that's from 2000.
Oh, then it would have been 2002.
August 5, 2002.
Okay, that's right. Okay, so it was in 2002, then it was 17 years ago. And we haven't had another one since then. Thank you, historian. Oral comments for items other than those on the agenda. Let me see. Greg Villegas is a water rate study. Financial deficiencies, is that on the agenda?
No, first item, public comment.
Okay. I was not sure if you wanted to do them all at once or not.
No, I like coming back up here and over again.
More
I
TV.
wanted to register, if I did not already by email to Clemens and you, request that the board authorize participation in a study being done by the American Water Works Association. It has to do specifically with the aging infrastructure and public works. The first phase of this study specifically is the pipes, not tanks, pumps, and so forth. I will forward you the email I got from the analyst there. It's part of the research I've been doing. I've been in contact with some of these agencies about stuff. The advantage to the district is to get the benchmark data that shows performance and condition of agencies throughout the country. I hope it won't take much time at all for staff to fill out the inventory of pipes and the data they request. The point it will make going forward is it will give the district a basis for justifying things like the rate increases. In the last version of their study, which is 2008, if I recall correctly, they forecast a tripling of water rates because of aged infrastructure deficiencies. And my math on the last study shows that the pipes alone is a $3 trillion problem. Of course,
Here?
No, nationally.
Oh, thank you.
You're not that expensive here. Okay, so.
Can you pause for a minute? Cover my heart rate.
So, again, I would request that the board authorize staff to participate in this study to get the benefits of the benchmark study and the findings, which I think will support a lot of the work you're trying to do here to keep our infrastructure robust. And I will forward that email if I haven't already. Again, I don't have email of late, so I have a hard time communicating. But as soon as I get it, I will send it to you.
Thank you, yes,
Thank you.
and we have two engineers from SRT here who will be speaking later, but we have spent, what is it? Trying to think, probably $15 million on pipe and pump replacements for the water system, maybe more.
It all comes together, yes, I mean, it was, 8 million in infrastructure from the bond
Right.
alone. And then a good chunk of at least 500,000 or so, each year until recently, right? So recently, we dropped off a little bit. On,
Right.
spending money.
So we understand, and if it won't take a whole lot of time, we'd be happy to participate, but you are correct, and a lot of the problems are east of this Rockies. Where they're
Actually, the
very-
study shows the west coast is at greater risk right now than the east coast.
Oh, that's interesting, from old infrastructure or
Because
from
they've
earthquakes?
already gone through their first round of replenishment.
Oh,
Kathy,
interesting, Rick.
after attending some LAFCO conferences, we are in pretty good shape on the west coast. The Central Valley of California has humongous problems. We are lucky we had an example of one near LA where not only are they having brown water supplied to everybody, but they had no water meters, no hydrants, no accounting system. There are some serious problems, a lot of it in the Central Valley. And they're talking about consolidation. There are districts that have 10 and 12 people off one well, and things are going bad. And I hope that they will be able to resolve all those problems. But we on the coast right here are kind of blessed with having a great water supply that we can maintain. So.
Right, so thank you for bringing that to our attention, Rick. We have no public hearing, consent agenda, approved minutes for November 5, 2019, approved financial statements for October 2019, approved warrants for December 1, 2019, SAM flow report for October 2019, monthly review of current investment portfolio, connection permit applications received, monthly water production report for October 2019, rain report, solar energy report, and monthly public agency retirement service report for September 2019.
Move to approve. Second?
I want to make sure that everybody understands that if there are questions about any individual items, they should be pulled separately.
Yes.
So, either for you, I don't know if you're familiar with practice, but we can ask to have any items pulled for discussion, any other consent agenda. And it's fairly normal that we'll pull one or two to discuss.
Yes. Okay, discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Old business.
Yeah, should I just,
Review and public action concerning water rate study.
thanks Catherine. So last we talked about this was exactly a month ago. And that was at the November 7 meeting. And there were some questions raised about the details on the future capital replacement needs that we focused on a little bit. We worked with SRT on essentially a look of how much money is needed for replacements on an annual basis. And so we have a presentation coming from SRT tonight, and then we're continuing our discussion about the major questions, how to structure really the rate increase, and that will come from Bartle Wells. So our staff recommendation ultimately is to receive the presentation, discuss and direct staff further we anticipate that this will come back to the board once again. So with that, I recommend that we ask Mara to
Since we have a slideshow, I'm going to step to the back.
start the slideshow, yes?
Based on the condition and the life, yeah, those exactly. The detail.
There's so many
And be in the way. Stand that. Oh.
That's all.
I had a migraine for 3 days. That's what they promised. That hasn't been the case. Because of the like a flash of light.
Where did Tanya go?
Oh, she's on vacation right now in Europe. She's in Durango for all of us.
Frozen.
Okay, now just, you have the word.
I take 10 milligrams every day as a preventative for a real migraine.
So, hi, I'm Laura from SRT Consultants, and I'm going to provide a brief overview of the methodology that was used to assess the district's asset replacement needs. And I'll let Alex take over for the bulk of the presentation. So, this analysis first starts by compiling an inventory of all of the assets of the water system and sorting them into main categories of types of assets. Now, once we have compiled and have a solid asset inventory, we then want to estimate replacement costs for each of these assets. To the best of our abilities, based on records available, estimate year of installation, and then use industry standards, manufacturer's information, and field experience to apply average service life to each type of asset. Now, when we talk about water system, we are somewhat dealing with a large variety of types of assets, so as listed on the slide, we're talking about water storage tanks, groundwater wells facilities, PRV stations, hydrants, etc. Now, it can feel somewhat a little bit more manageable to plan for the replacement of hydrants or valves, but some of the larger ticket items, like storage tanks and treatment plants, can require extensive planning and design. So, a lot of the assets that are considered here do have an average service life around 20 to 30 years, but then again, that varies with the large variety of types of assets. Now, at the end of this stage of the analysis, what we have is a recommended replacement year for each asset and an estimate of replacement cost. Now, once we have that, we're able to tally the replacement costs for any given year. And this provides us a base, as obviously you all know, but a basis to kind of for planning investments to maximize the efficiency of the assets in the field. And what this translates to for the water system is first and foremost to avoid, obviously, like unexpected failures in the field, which then require emergency repairs. Emergency replacements can cause disruption in service, and most of the time actually end up costing more money than it would have been to actually plan ahead and replace that asset before it actually failed in the field. Now, another advantage is that it can actually help reduce the maintenance costs in the sense that an overextended asset can actually become more expensive to maintain and operate than it actually needs to. And delaying the replacement of an asset can feel like a capital cost savings, but sometimes the maintenance costs actually creep up and are higher than they need to be. So this table shows a lot of numbers that I can understand feel kind of like overwhelming, but I do have a graph and a couple slides that basically shows these, so not to worry. But basically, one thing to note is that any asset that was compiled in the asset inventory and that based on its average service life and estimate year of installation was due for replacement before today is assumed to be up for replacement in year one of this analysis, which is 2020. So there is basically a deferred replacement of assets that is considered to happen in 2020. Now, once we've done this tally of replacement costs, we can then estimate the annual investment required to stay on top of replacing those assets on time before they fail in the field. So this presents 3 different timeline scenarios, so a 20-year, a 50-year, and a 100-year timelines, where we are looking at approximately $2 million per year in annual investment on a 20-year timeline. And when we look at a 50 and 100-year timeline, this is approximately $1.5 million per year. And this is where we see how the deferred replacement basically shows up a little more in the first 20 years, because this deferred replacement that comes up in 2020 is then diluted over a longer period of time when we look at 50 and 100 years. Now, this is here the graph that I was mentioning. So what this graph shows is the annual required cost to keep up with the aging assets. And so the blue bars are the tallied cost basically to replace assets as they reach their end of life. And the purple bars are the annualized investment required to make sure that money is kept aside so that the funds are there when the larger ticket items come up. So obviously some years have smaller investment, and then especially for facilities like storage tanks, large storage tanks, water treatment plants, and obviously water mains definitely add up in terms of replacement costs. So
Before you, could we ask a question?
Sure.
Before you go on, can you expound a little bit on the seemingly disproportional height of the blue lines for 20, 25, 28? Are those, it doesn't make sense. Can you explain that a little bit?
absolutely. So for example, in 2025, 2028 is that very large peak, for example, and this is where we have the Alta Vista Tank 1 and the rehabilitation of the Alta Vista treatment plant. So my next sentence was basically going to be, we see a lot of peaks and valleys in this graph, and realistically the implementation of this, where some large projects end up falling on the same year, in reality the implementation would most likely have these projects be staggered along a few years, for ease of implementation. So overall, basically, this graph shows the extent of the assets that need to be replaced in the next 20 years, and highlights the need to plan ahead. But in terms of those peaks, where 2028 includes the replacement of the Alta Vista Tank 1 and the Alta Vista treatment plant, where some of that peak, for example, if we were to plan for the replacement of the Alta Vista Tank 1 in 2029 instead of 2028, this specific peak would look obviously less intimidating. So these are basically the direct results of what the analysis gives us in theory when we're looking at year of installation and average service life.
The way I understand this, and please correct me if I am wrong, is the purple ones are what we're building towards our reserves. And the blue ones are when we expend them on major expenditures.
Exactly.
And one more question. This is 2019 dollars, in other words, present value constant dollars, not the future actual costs.
So, I wanna make sure that we understand that we're not looking at building necessarily reserves, we're looking at putting the money in the ground. So in case of, for example, one of the larger expenditures, like Lara said, at Alta Vista Tank, that's gonna cost us several $1 million, that's of course when we have to build up funds to then be able to spend them. Hope that makes sense.
So they'd be, or what's our phrase for it, something about specific reserves, I forget what the word is, but.
Designated?
Designated reserves, yes. So,
Yeah, these are designated
the
reserves.
savings account for that item.
Oops. I see Alex is going to correct us all.
No, you're all correct, but I wanted to point out that that purple bar assumes an annual investment of $2 million, which is kind of like the long-term norm. So I don't think you're gonna be building up, 1 cent of reserves. If you're starting at a lower level of funding, you're gonna be still, you can see the very first bar there, there's about 2.5 million of already deferred projects that are kind of overdue for replacement. So you've already got the needs. If you're gonna be funding, I'm just making up $500,000 a year to start off, you're gonna be you already have a lot of projects you're gonna be spending on, so you're not gonna be accruing funds for something that's happening, 10, 15 years down the line. So I don't fathom that there's ever gonna be a big pile of cash sitting there. Maybe at some point in the future there will be, but for the near term, you're gonna be, as Clemens mentioned, I think, pay as you go.
That's right.
And how about 2025? Why is that one high?
So 2025 actually includes the replacement of water mains, so different stretches of water mains based on when they were put in the ground, and I believe also replacement of PRV stations. So basically, that's where that peak is. Then in 2031, we have the replacement of the Portola tank and the Pillar Ridge treatment plant rehabilitation that comes in. And we also have one of these peaks being the schoolhouse pump station, and including also replacement of water mains that, once again, in the reality implementation of these, half of those could be realistically installed over a few years.
The idea here is to give us an over time rough estimate of the kinds of expenses that we might be looking at. These would not be specific planning numbers. This is based on what we have in the ground as we expect it to wear out. This is spreading the replacement out over the years. This isn't an actual set of plans of exactly what we would do and exactly when. And I presume that, I'll ask it this way. In 2020, you've got a list of things that by some criteria have reached end of useful life. Have we actually examined those items in the ground to see if they are actually at their end of useful life? Or is this based on a book exercise on the age of the items?
I would say a little bit of both. In the sense that, like you were saying, this is the exercise kind of helps us visualize the extent of the assets and kind of have in our minds the larger items that are coming up that are going to need significant amount of funds that need planning ahead. In the 2020 deferred replacement, I do believe that this includes a few different groundwater wells and PRD stations, which realistically could use much needed rehabilitation and are at risk, basically. So deferring the replacement just increases the risk of those specific
No, I
facilities.
understand that. I'm a big proponent, and I've been talking for years about getting this kind of set of numbers in front of us, both here and at the sewer authority. So I'm huge on this. I've done this in my field. I'm gonna presume that the things to the left of this graph are gonna be things that SRT and our staff have already been keeping a careful eye on, and these would be the things that would show up in the CIP. And, we would already be planning to be doing maintenance on these things. But I also am mindful that, I would hate to go in some year, dig something up and say we're gonna spend a lot of money on it, and dig it up and find out, oh, wow, this is really doing well, we didn't need to, right? So, I presume based on all the years of practice with SRT, that there's a whole lot of examination of the stuff that's coming up, and so we're putting things at the top of the list that we know, but I do need to understand, how much of this is the strict book exercise based on acquisition date, when putting, data, putting it in service, and how much of this has been informed by on-the-ground knowledge about individual items.
I want to say it's a very good question. I want to just summarize one more time that I think it was very important that you pointed out that this is not really related to any capital improvement program that we actually look at, right? So from that angle, it's the book exercise. On the other hand, we understand our facilities and the theoretical life that is applied is really just a theoretical life because, for example, tanks, we have a tank that is over 100 years old. On the other hand, a generator that's sitting out here might as well be sitting out on a boat and could rust away much faster than we anticipate. So there's a lot of theory that goes into this. It is really the exercise to explain why are we looking at a financial need, and what is this financial need? And it has to be really a theoretical approach to come up with this number. But of course we look at the Alta Vista tank in real numbers because we know what that facility looks like right now, and we don't have to put artificial life to it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we have a group understanding of what we're looking at and understanding that this is not, we know for sure in 2025 we have to spend, $4.5 million that year. But over the next few years, we've got a pretty good idea that to take the proper care of the system, we're gonna have a run rate that if we're not spending it, we're falling behind and we're taking on more risk of failure and like we did at Sam with the lines that leaked, and then we had to do all the emergency work on it, plus all the penalties, plus all the consternation that came from that. So we know we've got some pretty recent experience of what happens if you defer too long.
Can I ask a question? In conjunction with Scott's comments, would it be possible, Clemens and Alex, to have a graph produced going to the left, as Scott said, going to the left, showing what the costs have been, to show us a continuation to the left, to see where we have been? Is that possible?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, so you can see historically what you've been investing in. Yeah, that's a good
The last
idea.
15 years or something.
I think it'd be really helpful there too, to show the source of the funds for those. So if we had any like Clean
Oh,
Beaches
good point.
grants or other things,
Oh, yeah.
we can break that down, because as we look at this, if we don't get help, it all comes out of the community's pockets. If we do get help, one thing I want to point to is we've had some success in no small part because of staff and SRT landing some grant money, and that's been really good for this community.
So if they do make a backwards graph, can they put, like, if there's a big spike, say what the issue was? you know, one year when something broke down that was major or something like that, or not?
Well, yeah, because we could put footnotes, for instance, when we built a new tank.
All right, it's gonna be the tanks that are gonna be the large
The
issues.
big spot.
And I want to add that we have had a member of our community here in the recent past talking about how the economies of scale and so on, and how much better it would be if we were to consolidate with the district next door. I want to make it a point that all of these are in-district costs. They're not going to go away. If you look at the chart with the long line of numbers, you'll notice there's an annual replacement cost and then a present value of renewal. And what it shows on the far right is that if we did it today, it would cost a whole lot less than when we do it in, say, 2031, where a $3 million project is roughly $4 million. That's what happens with money. Things get more expensive. And these are all projects that need to be done to keep the water system for Montara and Moss Beach operating efficiently and with a reasonable cost of operations. And if we put it aside, as Scott mentioned, like the pipe that broke at Sam, costs all of a sudden go way out of hand, and they still have to be paid. And you'll see that in our sewer bills, because that's what's coming up, is our sewer bills are going to be going up. But these costs are things that have to be done within our district boundaries. And it's a good analysis. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you for raising the point. On the replacement costs, are those projected as the expected future replacement cost of each item based on how far in the future we might have to buy it? So like if we know a tank will cost $1 million today, with the cost of construction index, we can inflate that out to, if we wait 20 years. Did we do it that way, or did we use present replacement values?
So this basically, we tallied the replacement costs for every year that would come up, and then calculated the present value of renewal that's shown on here using the customer price index as inflation rate.
Okay. So
what are the big tall stacks? I mean, like 2028, that's much taller than the other ones. What's gonna happen that year that's making it go so high?
So this basically is a year that happens to have two large capital improvements that would be the replacement of the Alta Vista Tank 1, as well as the Alta Vista treatment plant. That through this exercise, using the theoretical average use life happened to fall in the same year, where, like we were discussing, in the implementation, like we were saying, we're not dictating 2028, this much must be spent that year, obviously, but this large stack represents the replacement of Alta Vista Tank 1 and the Alta Vista treatment plant.
One other thing I want to point out for everyone's understanding is that we don't have really so this is really just the replacement of infrastructure. So this means the districts, the district has plenty of need for putting money in the ground on this basis.
Well, the ongoing operations and maintenance.
This is ongoing operations and maintenance, exactly.
Well, this would be on top of what we have to spend to keep things working.
Right, this is replacement costs.
Yeah.
And so anything new is not included.
Anything new and anything that unexpectedly breaks, right? The hole in the ground we were looking at the other day. It'd be great if we fixed everything before it broke, but something's always gonna break.
Correct.
We'll always have a surprise. There might be an earthquake, ground shifts, or we just happen to buy a part that's just not gonna last that long.
Yes, that's additional cost.
Yeah.
You're right. Okay.
Good, and so that's your presentation.
Alex.
Okay.
I'll leave it to Alex.
I mean, that is, I mean, perfect segue, what we wanted to talk about. Honestly, I don't have a lot new to bring up, but, you know, sometimes when it's, I mean, you can see the magnitude of the funding needs are about $2 million per year. The district's current rates generate about $1.9 million per year on an annual basis. So to jump to that funding level requires a doubling of rate increases, which is less than the tripling of rates that's needed that Greg talked about maybe around the country, but
Well, Alice, wait,
Yeah.
hold on for a minute. So 1.9, is that for the, is that for replacement costs, or is that for actually running the water system?
That was the,
Two
I
different-
think he misspoke. I think he meant that's revenues.
Yeah,
not-
revenue.
revenues
Not
are,
margin.
so one taking in all your rate revenues that you currently get in an annual year, so all the fixed and volumetric charges,
Yeah,
they bring in about $1.9 million
so
per year.
you're saying 2 million per year,
2 million per year is what's
Taking 1.9.
needed
right?
for replacements going forward. Your current rates only generate a very small amount for capital. So we're looking, if you really were to fund this full 2 million starting next year, you practically have to double your rates. A lot of times agencies don't want to do that. That's why sometimes it takes a few kind of iterations. And that's why I wanted to talk about some options there. So it's a huge funding need. You're not the only one facing this. I think Greg mentioned there's a study that said agencies around the country may have to triple their rates over time to really get on top of what's needed. Other agencies that we work with in the Bay Area are aware of these huge tidal wave of replacement needs coming down the line, so have been trying to gradually ratchet up their rates each year. So they're doing $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, ratcheting up to higher levels of replacement funding. Historically, as we've mentioned in the past, the way a lot of the projects have been funded is with debt service for a lot of the major projects. When you did the geo bonds to acquire the water system, a chunk of the money was also generated to do the initial repairs and get the system up to a reasonable operating condition. And you've gotten some, I believe, state revolving fund loans, I-bank loans, kind of a mix of stuff on the water and sewer. It's a little more general fund money, general geo bond money, that's helped contribute some big chunks of, towards the projects that you have done in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And I think that's a great idea to make that chart looking backwards to see, hey, what have we been funding and how have we been funding it, and what have we been doing. But our take is that, as Laura pointed out, there's a $2 million a year funding need on average going forward to stay on top of this stuff. Doesn't mean you have to actually in year 2025 that you're going to have to spend $4.5 million, 3 years later another $6 million. These costs will be spread over a number of years, so your spending plan will you'll prioritize what you're going to do. And as also has been brought up, that this is more of a theoretical exercise as to what's like a typical useful life. As Clemens pointed out, you've got some facilities that operate longer than their maybe annual average engineering estimate for what their lifespan would be. So it's a little flexible how you can fund the program, but the important thing is you need to generate a higher level of revenue stream to start funding these projects. Our take is that you don't need to get there overnight. You don't have to start generating $2 million out of the gate next year. You could start lower, because it's a big hurdle to put in for the ratepayers. Anything is better than nothing, and what I just see from working with a lot of agencies when they're looking at big challenges is it's hard to solve it all right away, but if you can take significant steps in the right direction and continually build upon it, eventually you'll get to where you need to go. You might not get all the dollars year one, but you'll eventually get to a higher funding level, and that's what's being proposed for this water system reliability charge, a new funding source to provide a stream of funding to help fund these projects. separate from the regular rates. The regular rates would still continue funding operation, debt service. They contribute a little towards capital, but this new charge would really be the funding source for the repairs, for the replacements that you're gonna need over time to address deficiencies and repair old assets. The last time we talked about some billing charge methods. One of them that was being proposed is putting on the property tax rolls, and it sounded like folks thought that was a good idea. So at this meeting, what I'm gonna talk about, there's a few issues that we wanna get some additional input on. Now that we've kind of heard this before, and maybe thought of it a little bit more, to get your input for coming up with the details of what the actual charge would look like. In terms of single-family homes, you know, one way that could be done, it could be a
Wait,
fixed charge.
are you talking about the new funding source?
Yes.
Or are you talking about increasing the rates to pay for the funding source?
Well, this would be a new charge called a water system reliability charge, was kind of the draft name that came out working with the finance committee. So a new charge, it would be separate from your regular rates. Your regular rates would continue to be the charge, people pay every other month. But each year on the property tax rolls, there'd be a charge that's specifically for funding these, major replacements that are needed over time. And these facilities, they benefit all the properties out there, so it seemed appropriate that the properties would pay for them not necessarily the tenant. This is what's protecting the property values of all the homes. So this is a new charge separate from the regular rates.
Okay.
Specifically, to provide a dedicated funding source for these capital replacements.
Okay, thank you.
And, it's a new charge, and we wanted to get input on how should the details of the charge work? How are we gonna charge single-family homes? How are we gonna charge commercial customers? Is it gonna be a fixed charge? Is it gonna be a usage-based charge? So that's what we wanted to get some board input on, if there's some preferences, because we want to come back with some specific charges next time we come back to the board. I have some sample charges in this presentation, but, one way we had talked about it with staff and with the finance committee is it could be a fixed charge. Every single-family home pays the same. Most of your customers out there are single-family homes. Another option that was brought up, maybe it could be a hybrid charge where it's partly a fixed charge and partly a usage-based charge. Each year you can look back and see how much water the customers used over the prior year, and that would be a basis for the usage component, similar to what you do for your sewer rates. For the commercial, it could be a fixed charge based on meter size, or again, there could be, a partial fixed charge, again, a partial volumetric charge. So we wanted to get input on things like that. What does the board at this initial stage think are the preferred methods for how the charge should specifically be implemented? And I'm going to show you a table in a second that shows some kind of sample charges that might make it a little more realistic. But so those are some of the big questions we wanted to get the input on. One, what level of funding do we want the charges? Does the board want to go out with for the first step of implementing these charges? And I threw out an example, maybe $500,000 a year. No, that's not the full $2 million a year that's hypothetically going to be needed over time, but that is a big step in the right direction in establishing a charge on the books at a level that might be a little more politically palatable to folks. I'll point out about 9 years henceforth, the GO bonds that everyone's paying for their property taxes are going to reach final maturity and fall away. So that may be an opportunity where there could be a bump up in funding to replace the money that's going away with the GO bonds that might not, might be equal replacement, or maybe it's only a little bit more. So, what funding level do you want to start with out of the gate? And I keep saying, you don't have to do $2 million right away, but in my mind, anything to do is a step in the right direction. That's nothing wrong with that. We came up with some sample fixed and volumetric charges. These are just ballpark estimates to give you a sense of what it would look like. This first one here assumes a 50-50 hybrid rate, where half the revenues would be generated from fixed charges and the other half of the charges would be generated from the volumetric water quantity charges based on people's water use from the prior year. Each column shows a different funding target. For example, on the left, it shows what if we were generating a target level of 500,000 per year, then a million, 1.5 over on the right. What would the charge look like for generating a full 2 million per year? And I'll talk about the 500,000 per year. What that would entail is a fixed charge of equates to roughly $11.50 per month. And that equates to, it's about $277 per year. So it'd be $277 per year, somewhere in that range.
But that's at the 500,000?
That's at the 500,000 level. $277 fixed charge per year that goes on the county tax rolls, as well as a volumetric charge of, I apologize, there's too many numbers on this table, but a volumetric charge of about $2, slightly over $2 per unit of water.
That's
So-
also gonna be on the property tax bill? Maybe?
All on the property tax bill is is one way of doing it, yeah. But I think it sounded like an approach that people liked the sound of last time. And also from working with the finance committee, it sounded to be like a preliminary preferred approach. So about $275 fixed charge per year plus $2 per unit. That's to generate 500,000. To generate 2 million, it'd have to be 4 times that size. And at the bottom of this table, we show a little further down in the yellow section, if the commercial rates were based on meter size, similar to how you do your current rates, what kind of the monthly equivalent would be for, the various meter sizes. So by the time you get to a 4-inch meter, it's about 14, 15 times that of the base meter size. So the larger meters would pay more, just as they currently do in the current rate. So this just shows it on kind of a monthly basis for people can see kind of what the monthly impact is, but it would be a one-time annual charge collected on the property tax rolls. I guess it gets split up between 2 different payments each year. And the other option that we initially talked about was a fixed charge. It was all fixed. It'd be $275 per year. I'm going to backtrack a second. So if it's a fixed charge, it'd be about $275, $280 per year. If it's a volumetric charge, it'd be about $140 per year, half that, plus $2 per unit of water. So sorry for confusing anybody, but this one is the, normally I had the fixed one first. So it's either $280 a year for a fixed charge to generate 500,000, or half that, 140, plus a usage charge of $2 per unit to generate the same amount, 500,000. And obviously the charge would be higher if you were looking for to generate more revenue. So that's kind of like some of the key issues we wanted to get any input on, because and sometimes it takes a few times to kind of hash through the stuff, is what I find. It's a new charge, it's a significant impact on the ratepayers, and it's kind of new stuff coming at the board saying, hey, how do you want to do this? Sometimes you want to think about it for a little bit, but we would like to hear any general input. What level might the board want to look at for an actual charge if we came back next time? What level to fund? Is it maybe 500,000 a year, I think was suggested last time, as an initial step in the right direction, and then in future years it'll review and elevate as needed. How would the charges be implemented? Would it, right now you just want to do an initial charge, or maybe you can adopt a maximum or a multi-year phase-in? The billing we talked about could be ongoing bills, or you could do it on property tax rolls, and it sounded like there was a little bit of consensus for doing it on the tax rolls. I wanted to confirm that. And the final one is any input that folks have regarding how the charge should be applied. Should it be, one-time fixed charge each year? Should there be a fixed and a volumetric component that's based on people's usage? For commercial, again, it could parallel whatever's happening on the residential side with a half fixed charge and a half volumetric charge. And then there was a couple of other little details there. I mean, what do you do about Pillar Ridge, which serves a whole bunch of residential connections, but they're served by a single 4-inch meter. Historically, they're billed just, a single 4-inch meter charge. And also fire protection. You have 120 or so accounts out there that don't get regular water service, they get fire service only. If they're paying a fixed charge, might it be half that? If it was a hybrid charge, maybe they pay the fixed component and they pay zero for the usage component since they're not using any water, or should they pay something a little less? So any,
Alec, I have a quick
Yeah.
question, and then we should go to the public first, and then take it back to the board. And we can turn the camera off so the board can get back to the table. But what about people on wells who will not have any of these charges? But if they have to come back in, how do we accommodate, not accommodate, how do we account for these charges in our new rates, in our new connection fees? And because I could see that if we just kept our regular rate schedule and we're putting all this money in, at some point we will be analyzing the effect of these improvements on the buy-in charge. But is there a way we can be, and this is for you or Peter or Christine, but is it possible we could anticipate those charges in the new connection charges?
yes. Yeah, you could include a factor in the capacity charge levied to all the new connections. If they don't connect for 10 years, but the district's making a lot of investments that benefit that property, that there could be a way to factor that in.
Okay.
I would like to add a little bit to what Alex is saying, because I think this is really the most important part of the presentation. The target level of funding, I think that is something that is going to be a very difficult decision, and it's going to take some time. My recommendation is to really focus in the board discussion and discussion with the public on how should the charges be applied. I think this is really the first step that we need to address here right now. And so the listing, single family, multifamily mobile homes, ADUs. So the thought process is here really that should a multifamily home, should a single family home with a second dwelling unit actually pay a little larger contribution to this charge? What about the commercial accounts? Should there be a different class for commercial accounts? Alex, you explained the Pillar Ridge, particularly with very well with that we are currently charging them for the volumetric charge as any other customer. But the meter standby charge, the fixed component of our regular water rates, they're paying for a 4-inch meter. They're not paying per unit. They're not paying 226 5/8 meter charges. But instead they're paying a one charge for a 4-inch meter that Alex just explained is roughly equivalent to about 14, 15 5/8 meters.
Is that single family size? That'd be like 14
Yes.
single family homes?
Yes,
But there must be over 100 mobile homes.
226.
Okay.
And the same with the fire protection service. The thought process here really is we have a combination of varying scenarios. We have homes that don't have a domestic connection, but have a fire sprinkler connection with us. We have homes that have 2 connections, a domestic and a fire sprinkler. And that in varying meter sizes, for example. So before this, before we start this discussion, I think I want to highlight this to try and guide the discussion a little bit more on this point. And with that, I also want to point out that really all of these questions are somewhat addressed already through a meter size, meaning a home a single-family home that's on a 3/4 inch meter, adding an additional dwelling unit is required to upsize the meter to a 3/4 inch meter, for example. A commercial account will have a larger meter size. So I'm just gonna try to kickstart this a little bit in a direction.
There are some single-family homes that have outlaw units. In other words, they never went through a process of making it into a 2-unit building. They have like their garage is rented out or the downstairs is rented out. So they're gonna be getting the benefit of a single-family connection, even though they may be using, you know,
So
2
you're
families.
talking about illegal units, and I don't
Yeah,
think we
I
need to
know.
consider illegal units. We're have to rely on planning agencies doing their job correctly, so.
There's no permit police around, so.
Right.
So can we turn off the camera or the projector and then we can bring the board back? Okay, let's hear from the audience first. So, Sid, you have questions?
They're brief, because I got here late, but
Okay,
I'll fill this out when I get back.
that's good.
Okay. Questions
Carlisle.
mostly. Carlisle and Young Moss Beach. So, I know this is like not being discussed right now, but, you're gonna possibly burden us with this new charge, however you decide to charge us on the property tax bill or monthly, or bi-monthly, I mean, every other month, like our water bill is. What happens when they finally come out with the results of the SAM lawsuit and then we have to pony up a big charge for that too? Are you guys taking that into consideration? Because they have so many capital improvements that have gone deferred.
That's a
No, we're not
separate
taking it
system.
under consideration because we're talking about the water
I
side
know.
right now.
I realize that, so my feeling as a property owner is, I might be in favor of, you know, promoting this and saying, yeah, it sounds like a good idea, but not if like half a year later, they're gonna come around and bite a big another bite out of my cheek for the other side for this Half Moon Bay lawsuit.
Let me tell you, Sid,
I
the
have
Half
plenty
Moon
to
Bay,
lose.
the Half Moon Bay lawsuit
Yeah,
is an expensive burden
on everything.
because the fixes were not done.
Right, deferred
And
maintenance.
so that's the case. If we do what I believe, what we have to do, which is a responsible thing to do, and take on and fix the water system,
Our water system.
our water
Right.
system, no one else's. It will be burdensome, but not nearly as burdensome as if we have a major breakdown of a whole lot of stuff.
True.
So there is a burden, as you've heard me say, there is a problem with whatever choice you make. You have to make a choice, and this is a stark example of the difference between the burdens of deferred maintenance with as Scott mentioned, all the fines and the emergency midnight work and all of that stuff, or planned maintenance.
Well, I did see one thing in, I think it was Alex's slides, that said existing deficiencies, so we need to upgrade ongoing existing deficiencies. It was on page 2. I'm just kind of curious, what would those be? Like the fact that we know there's aging water pipes in our ground? Or is there something that's known right now?
Nina or Lauren?
Well, I mean, yeah,
Would you
it's-
come up to the mic so that everyone can hear you?
I
Thank
think
you.
those are my.
Come on up here.
Well, before she does, I just wanna say, I'd rather be in favor of keeping it low in the beginning,
Thank you.
that's all. And not really necessarily on the property tax bill. My school charges are high enough.
Laura, you can rescue me if I've made any mistakes, but I think the existing deficiencies, mainly just like all the deferred maintenance that happened over the years, like valves that weren't replaced, hydrants, water mains that needs to replace, but that haven't done, all the 2-inch mains kind of lying around in the system, and then also like basically like other assets that should have been replaced, but haven't. That's
Nothing specific then, just the water pipes in the ground.
A lot of bits and pieces.
yeah, and
That
then
add
the
up.
list is also like, yeah, it's like small bits and pieces, but then it's also like, they're like, sort of.
Okay.
I wanted to just comment on what you said before about are we going to see something similar on the sewer side? The answer is yes.
Huge.
The board authorized a sewer rate study a meeting or so ago. So we should be able to, in around January, February, bring something to the board. And ultimately, we will see this process and the sewer service charge process being looked at parallel.
But the sewer side will have by then they'll know something about what we're gonna have to pay for Sam, right? Okay. Just wanted to,
Yes.
so we don't vote one thing in and then get hit with another right away.
We're gonna vote one thing in, and you are going to get hit with another.
Well,
That's what I figured, that's why I
well,
wanna start out slow.
We've been talking for some time now about work at Sam that's been deferred.
I know,
None of that has changed, and so we
It's
know,
coming.
we know, well, and some good work has been done on understanding the backlog there. So that's coming, and we know that we're gonna have to be juggling. One thing I wanna say, and I think most of us here know this, but for folks at home, much of the infrastructure, both the water and sewer systems were paid for with like federal funds. So you might wonder, how did we get into this mess where stuff is wearing out and we don't have enough money to replace it? It's because we never had the money to build it in the first place. So we took on the responsibility for this thing, grateful for the funding that got it built. But if you're gonna maintain it, sooner or later, with any of these in-the-ground systems, you're going to be buying another one and another one and another one as an ongoing thing. The same way I've bought 2 roofs for my current house, and I'm sure I'll buy a 3rd because they wear out. And you start to see leaks, and you get up there and you're like, oh man, raccoons or whatever. But things wear out, and if you don't know that the federal funding got us off the ground in the first place, it can look a little lopsided until you realize. So, but on the other side of that is, as things go forward, we find better technologies for certain things that we're doing. So some of the costs that we're anticipating, we might be able to do for a lower cost, or for the same amount of money, we might be able to get a lot more done. Sometimes we've had things where, based on how the economy was going, like in the downturn, like around 2009, we had some work to do. We went out for bids. People were so hungry for work that we did almost twice as much work for the money that we'd had in the budget.
I like that.
So part of what the team here has to do is try to get set for, what we expect to be happening, and keep a sharp eye and apply really good management as we go to get the most for what we're doing. We've also done things like I said, this year we just don't have the money yet for that big replacement. What's it gonna cost us? We literally asked the question, what's it gonna cost us to keep a generator running for another year? And so we increased how often we maintained it. We had put money in the budget for that, but we deferred a big capital expense until the economy was a little bit better. So you get all these ways to fly this plane. Just understand, we do have to look at the big run rate as, if nothing else happens, this is what it's gonna cost.
Greg, do you have any questions? I'm sure you do.
you could pass these around. I hope I have enough copies.
We have a copy of,
Craig Yeagas, Montara.
we can share.
You may recall the last time I was up here, I said I had 7 things, but I was only gonna talk about one of them. Unfortunately, I now have 11, and I hope you'll allow me to get through them. I'm pleased to see the new title of this report. By the way, I would like to use the term replenishment instead of replacement, because I think that gives a good emotional context to this. And what we're seeing here is a methodology like the AWWA guidelines for capital reserves. The thing that's missing is the same thing that I said a month ago, and this is something the board needs to make a decision. It does not show a forecast of what the reserves would be under each rate scenario. And one of the key decision criteria I think the board faces is how much will we have in reserve if we do funding level X, Y, or Z. So I think that has to be done. I would make a few quick comments. When you're doing this analysis, I would recommend against consideration of any growth. I would let it be good news later if growth actually pays for itself. But why put in the forecast something that may not come true and just create more pressure later? I would do a sustainable rate based on current population usage. One of the questions you might ask in making the decision is what level of reserves do we need? There are extensive documents out there on the nature and types of different reserves, one of which is capital. The AWWA has a good document on this. If you don't use a document like that, how else are you going to decide what level of reserves is out there? One measure is, do I have enough money to fund what we need to build? But then you raise the question, Scott mentioned it, there's such thing as an emergency reserve, okay? And there are various other kinds of reserves. Another kind of reserve is also used for fluctuations in cash flow, which is one reason I would vote for fixed only charges for this asset replenishment fee. From my background in finance, what I see is too much volatility in the revenue from rates. The capital expenditures are not volatile. They are relatively predictable and steady. So you've got an extra risk as a financial institution here in that you have too much volatility in your revenues and not enough volatility in your expenses. You can't cut back the expenses because people cut back usage. So I would also build via tax rolls. Again, that avoids cash flow issues as well as an administrative headache. Sorry, Sid. And I would also, and you've heard me say this, and I will provide a document, I would also recommend a massive increase in connection fees, which needs to be studied. I don't understand how you can set rates without considering connection fees, unless all your forecasts for revenue and so forth are also going to exclude connection fees in their forecast. If you're going to exclude the connection fees in the revenue forecast, then you could exclude rethinking the basis for the connection fees. But if you don't, you can't. That makes it be a subtlety. One other thing that's come up is the payback from the sewer reserves for the loan that was made to the water reserves. It's been said that previously the loan went the other direction. This really raises the issue of the adequacy of capital reserves for both water and sewer, which should be studied at the same time. Because if you're going to be moving money back and forth, how can you not look at what happens to the sewer if you don't pay the loan back? Follow what I'm saying there? So I think a holistic approach is needed there. That might require some simplistic assumptions in the beginning about what the sewer rates are going to be, or maybe you update both when you do the sewer study. I note that the answer that came out this time is about $1.9 million in annual funding. Last time it was $1.8 million over 5 years for approximately $7 million total capital expenses. I'm curious why the first 5 years of this chart only show $2.8 million in capital expenditures versus the $7 million we had in the last draft. And I'd like to know what's been removed and why. I could make a guess. But there were $7 million over 5 years, totaling $1.8 million a year in a previous version of this document, and now there's only 2.8. That may be an academic question, if this is the right answer, but I'm curious to know why the change. As far as discounts for certain ratepayer populations, a discount for somebody is a surcharge for somebody else. So I think we need to study carefully, and I remember Lisa Ketchum here talking about the Pillar Ridge situation. For any ratepayer class you're going to consider a discount, you need to have a little worksheet which shows the capital replenishment requirements for that infrastructure. In the case of Pillar Ridge, for example, they contributed infrastructure. Well, so in an analysis like this analysis, if it doesn't already include it, it shows that their assets are all bright and shiny and good shape, and we don't need any more money for them for a long time, and thus we can justify giving them a break, or not, I don't know. But I think Lisa brought up a good point. They have contributed infrastructure, so we need to have a worksheet with financials and assumptions supporting any discount for any subsection of the population. I would also note on the graph that they showed, I mean, I'm familiar with present value, but you're going to be paying for the capital expenditures with future dollars. We ratepayers are going to be paying the rates with future dollars. So you also need a spreadsheet or graph that shows the then current dollars, not all 2019. Because we're not going to be locked into paying 2019 rates for 20 years. We're going to be paying something, and I'm guessing off the top, you're probably going to end up indexing those rates for inflation to cover the then indexed future costs of the capital improvements. That's an assumption on my part, but I don't think it's an unreasonable one. It doesn't have to be an assumption by just doing the spreadsheet in nominal dollars, which is to say the future dollar. You can resolve this issue and see whether or not things are going to work. And then finally, the missing key issue, which has been discussed in passing, is what are the decision criteria the board's going to use to make this decision? And the first item, I think, is the adequacy of the annual reserves under each rate scenario, as I mentioned before. So you have to project those reserves, because one of the things the board has to consider is that enough reserves? Okay? Separately, I think the dollar and percentage rate increase to the ratepayers under each scenario needs to be considered. And there's a lot of numbers on those tables, and it's very complicated, so maybe you have to pick a few sample populations and say, sample family of 4, consumption of X, their rates over time have gone up this much, single person, retired, living alone, their rates are going to go up this much. But you have to do something to assess what is going to happen to the ratepayers in order to make this decision. I think another thing that should be done is a comparison of the rates projected to those in other water districts for comparable consumption under each rate scenario. So if we do $500,000, $2 million, how will our rates compare with the rates that we're seeing in other districts? And then there's also going to be the probability of significant disgruntlement, I'll call it, in the ratepayer base, and Alex has been cautioning us, I think, about this, because he always comes back to the $500,000 scenario, which won't fund enough, but would be more palatable. So you're going to have to think as a board about the ratepayer disgruntlement, you know, putting on your hat both as a ratepayer and as fiduciary to decide what you think is required. And then as a minor decision criteria, and I don't know enough, but I've seen instances, there's the possibility for third-party intervention in the district under some scenarios. There have been cases where, well, there's a grand jury report, for instance, okay? Reserves that are too high trigger investigations by people who claim that there's stuff going on that's financially impropriety, whatever the word is, financial improprieties. So too high would be a problem, but also there could be the issue of consolidation forced on districts which don't have enough reserves and have inadequate financial situations. So I think as a background criterion. So I can email you this. I didn't have email. I've had trouble with email. But I think those are the first 4 decision criteria that come to my mind. You may have others. Thank you.
I can think of one other, and that is the big projects that are maybe coming online down the road, like, I think they're calling it Cypress, something over in Moss Beach Heights and Big Wave. Have you considered that as part of your numbers? Because those are gonna be big.
You're talking about mid-pen?
Mid-Penn housing and also Big Wave out down on Airport next to Pillar Ridge.
Those will pay for themselves.
Well,
Oh,
said,
like a
he
truck.
said
At what
yes,
rate?
yes, because this is only a very short 218 notice that we're sending out. And so that way we can do the calculations. These things are not going to be coming on in the next year or probably even the next 2 years. So we will be able to make those calculations. And Greg, I wanted to just interject that your comparison of rates to those of other water districts, we've done that in the past, and even if we tripled our water rates, we'd be very much lower than many
I'm
of the
merely
neighbors over the
recommending
hill.
a communication strategy which revisits that. If it's true, you should say it again.
Absolutely.
No,
And I almost brought that chart tonight.
Yeah, and your mention of the samples, we've done this with 218 notices, exactly this kind of thing. It's like, here's some examples, so if you fit in this category, yours might look like this.
Yeah.
We have to guard against like the wall of numbers that, you know,
Yeah.
Alex apologized for it, although I think we're kind of used to seeing this, so I appreciated having them all side by side, just so you know. But we've got to be careful when we communicate to the community, because if we put that wall of numbers up, if we're not careful, it's like we didn't tell them anything at all if we overdo it. So, it's kind of a catch-22. Some people like me want all the data, and other people are like, just tell me about me. But it's good points. It's being mindful of the audience and trying to convey what we can. And it's that very reason that I mentioned, the federal funding to get things built in the first place. Because it's understanding the context that actually helps understand that where we are is a place that everybody arrived. There was a KQED forum program about this recently, about all the underground infrastructure that the federal government paid for across the nation, and all the chickens are coming home to roost everywhere, kind of all at once.
What do you mean?
That the federal government paid for a lot of
7/8.
a lot of urban sprawl, paid to make urban sprawl happen by building a lot of water and sewer infrastructure out beyond what had been at the time
Why are the chickens coming home to
the
roost?
chickens
Because
are
now
coming
we
home
have
to
to
roost
pay
because
for it.
it all wears out.
Oh, I see.
We
And
have
it
to
all
fix-
wears out about 50 to 60 years after it gets put in. And, it's out of sight, out of mind. And so people are like, what kind of incompetent people didn't fix this thing? It just broke. And it's like, we've been thinking about it all this time and replacing everything that we can every year. But
I know we have been.
yeah, and we have been, and we've been very mindful about this, and so now it's like, okay, what initial steps are we gonna take? So to your point, and to some of Greg's point, we need to figure out, okay, what do we wanna do to get started on this? And so the key things for us, I think, are how do we think we might want to present structuring it? To Clement's point about, let's think about these different use cases. To Greg's point, let's make sure that if we have different scenarios, that we have something to back it up. And to that point about Pillar Ridge, in fact, we did a lot of economics work in negotiating with them about taking on that responsibility. And we did account for a lot of what had been put in the ground as a contributing factor to justify the rate structure that we put in place. So we've got a lot to rely on there.
But he has a good point about trying to get ahead of the grumble factor.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that I enjoy about this district, past board members and contemporary current ones, is one of the underlying focuses has always been how to be fair. And I think ultimately, this is all going to be tough for all of us, but if we can make it fair, and Greg, your point on the stability of our rate increases, we have seen the projections by basing our operations on water rates and consumption values instead of on meter charges. That's part of the problem, I believe, that we are in now, is that people reduce their water use, and therefore the projections for income weren't here, they weren't realized, and so, but being fair to everyone and making it so that everybody understands that I think that will be the most important thing. And if you look under the manager's report in the packet, you will see there's a very good piece on water rates and water uses in the community, and we're going to be sending these out with much greater frequency. Lou?
Correct Scott. Scott's comments applied to the sewer. The Clean Water Act of '72 paid for the sewer. All the water system that we have here, we paid for.
We bought,
No federal, no state, other than.
because it was private.
Sure. But we started from, stuff is already in the ground and.
Right.
You're right,
We
but,
bought it.
yeah. But much of what went into it was provided by, like, the wells at the airport were on the little,
Those were Coast Guard.
We, citizens paid for putting all the equipment in the ground. They just got the right from the federal government to put the wells in the ground because the federal government owned the land.
okay, so land acquisition cost was granted, so.
What, that's
there's a little something.
nitpicking. Let's bring this back to the board unless we have any more comments from the audience. Rick?
One quick comment, I mean, the comment I hear, other than I don't like rating increases, is I'm a frugal person, I don't use that much water, why should I pay the same as somebody else? So I would be in favor of a structure which had a flat rate component, but also was volume dependent also. So to honor and help the people who are being frugal, I don't think they should pay the same total rate as people who, have lawns and horses and gardens and that sort of thing. So, yeah, or extra families living down the hill or whatever. So I'd like to see a hybrid structure of a flat rate plus a usage.
So that counts for single-family, multifamily mobile homes, ADUs. What about commercial, pillar ridge, fire protection, new connections?
Yes.
Okay. Next, anybody? Peter?
It's a bit too early for me to comment.
Okay.
I would, when I look at the numbers, I would say the easiest from a financial point of view is just put it into the property tax rolls. That's the easiest collection. Whether that's the right move, especially for people who can't afford it, I don't know. As Rick said, that tie into your usage is justified. I just look at it more from a financial point of view than anything else. I know that we need the reserves. I know that that striving for the 1.5 million number is something that I kind of like, but I fully realize we need to have more input from the community to make up our mind. But we need to do it fast, because one thing is very sure, and that is that this isn't going to wait. If something breaks down, we are going to be paying penalties, and we are going to be in trouble with customers who can't get water. So we need to move on this issue, the sooner the better.
So, I agree with Rick, that we should be a combination. So we need to do this soon. Should we put this on the agenda for the next meeting and then think about a decision at that meeting? We're not gonna do this tonight.
No,
I
we've
think
got to
we
schedule.
skip the timeline. Ultimately, it needs to go, we need to have that decision so that we have time for a Prop 218 process before everything needs to go on the property tax roll, and that deadline is ultimately in August, so we count back 2 months for the Prop 218 process. I mentioned that we're going to go through a similar lifting on the sewer side, and that has the same timeline attached to it, so it makes sense to do this all at once. And so on the sewer side, we have less questions about how should this rate look like, because what we're doing here is we're this is uncharted territory for us, establishing now a separate infrastructure-related rate that goes on the property tax roll. So that's why we need to understand how this rate is structured before we then really, before we can start about, the funding level and the implementation. So.
But I think it would certainly help us when we get that extension into the past to see what did we do in the past, so that we have some guidance as to what are we going to change and how big are we going to change our former attitude towards the rate structure. Because historically speaking, everybody has been okay with what we were doing. So if we can get just a grip on what people were okay with, then we have a better input from the community.
I like some of Greg's suggestions too of figuring out,
Sid, we're back at the board.
Sorry.
You're welcome. Joe, got one?
Good, thank you.
Scott?
Peter, to your point, we know that we've been collecting about 1.9 a year. And we know we've been doing spending on the CIP capital improvement program at a rate which has been well under, for the most part. We've done some episodic big things, where we've done some saving. And Greg, you mentioned about the reserves, where we have reserves where we're saving for specific projects, that's one thing, but the typical reserve funds are there for, like the emergency reserve, typically there for, we need to be able to handle a crisis, or we need to handle so many days of difficulty with cash flow. Those are the kinds of things that reserves are typically for. The designated reserves, where we're setting up for projects, needs to be done based on the project schedule. So, we should be identifying the things that we could have kind of the generalized for saving for the list that we saw, but typically, I would expect that we're gonna have something like 5-year projection, we're gonna have the 5-year CIP. We're gonna say, these are the things that we've targeted, because, day over day, as we work with our engineer, we figure out, okay, here's the list of things that we really gotta do next. And we're gonna time order them, we're gonna say, there's 2 big projects that we can't possibly do in the same year for whatever reason. So we'll allocate these to the calendar, and then we need to make sure, to your point, that by the time the bills come due for those things at that spend date, that we've actually saved at the rate that it takes. It would be great if we do just a steady state, always, we just pull in $2 million a year, and and we just take whatever we need from whatever, but there's actually an activity of planning and saving and tracking that is just an ongoing activity, it's not a one-time activity. So, just speaking to some of the issues that have been put in front of us, putting on the tax rolls makes it easier for people who work with the banks in their home loans, and how some people put their loan and their tax bill into the structure of the home loan. So this would make it very much simpler for many people to do. It's something that should be very easy to anticipate the amount that it's gonna need, depending on how we structure it. If we have the usage factor in there, it'd be more like guessing about the sewer bill than a school bond tax. But I see real benefit to putting it in the tax rolls. It's something where it's much easier to have a conversation with your bank about how you want to have your reserves and manage your spending on that. I do appreciate the notion of a ramp where we move up, but I want to reiterate, I'm really interested in making a regular part of our discussion on this about where we're going to find other money, and that can be through grants, very low interest loans, things that we always do, but I did want to make sure it's part of this discussion, as well as efficiencies or changes in technology that might get us something. A lot of that is as we go, and not something we're going to have figured out by the end of January, but if we keep in mind this structure, we'll be looking for the opportunities to fill in various pieces. we're talking about being, for the most part, on top of that. So, the past performance, what we know is, different years, we've had proposals for different size increases. And the response from the public has led us to, as a general practice, be very conservative about the increases that we put into effect. May not feel like that to somebody who's just looking at their bill, but to this board, we know that we've been asking staff and Mother Nature to, do what you can to squeeze more life out of this system. So, but this goes back to my chickens coming home to roost thing. There does come a time to actually do the spend. So I'm, as much as I don't like it, I'm supportive of finding how far we can go in the first year and then looking to the future. And as I want to keep back pressure on, we know that the 2 million would be, this is the number that would just take care of it all. But that's the number that we would have if we could magically have it without any consequences. But it's the real world, so we need to keep the back pressure on it, and that's why I talk about new technology. It's why I talk about checking the condition of things in the ground. It's why I talk about, do we know whether or not it's realistic to expect longer life out of something than is written on the spec sheet? Or, in one of the engineering handbooks about what to expect. So all of that stuff is back pressure, and we've got crew and staff that, engineers who know how to go and make these assessments. That's where we get the well-informed CIP from, is that collaborative work of putting your heads together and saying, okay, we don't have infinite money, what are we going to try to do this year? So, a lot of words. I think the number around the, and I did want to express thanks for bringing in the end of the GEO bond. I think that ends in 2033, is that right? No, how?
128.
Great.
21.
28.
So 2028, so if we take into account in our planning, that, to your point, is a run rate that we know the community has been supportive of. We know that we were asking for a fixed period of time. So there's going to be a discussion where people said, hey, you told me that would end in 2028. But in terms of what the community has been able to muster, we've got an existing.
Well, and
So I would like to see modeling. I would like to see a tool where we can go say, hey, let's say pick a number out of 500,000 this year, 600 next, 700 the next, and then start maybe kind of peanut buttering the projects across the years to come and see, in what years, according to that schedule, do we go red? And start actually doing some of the constraint solving to see. It's nice to say slow started, but how much of a jam do we get ourselves into if we do that? But I don't want to just jump to 2 million either. I want to make sure we're actually solving it, not just, giving magic wand to it.
But I'm looking at the big picture, the problems that are going to come to us in terms of the sewage and the water. And then I'm thinking about our financial situation. If we have a big surprise coming from sewer, then that $500,000 that we previously were able to get out of the sewer to water, that situation could be reversed. And if that is going to be reversed, then we could be in cash flow problems.
No,
We don't want to have that either.
No, we have to plan this, but what we're talking about right now is an understanding of the capital needs for the system if we're going to take care of. But we've kicked this around in terms of fully funding depreciation. That's the magical term that we used for many years, but we've got stuff wearing out. We're trying to take into account what's it going to cost to keep up with the rate at which it wears out. We've got to consider this as a water system problem.
Yes.
The sewer system, we're doing the same thing, and we're at the same table, so of course we're gonna think about it. But so we should work into the model, do we put in our plan of record that money's gonna flow one way or the other between the two?
Well,
we should,
one of the
we should
things,
encounter that question and write in, you know, in pencil, some answer.
one of the things I'd like us to start thinking about, and figure, it's worth thinking about, and that would be, maybe funding this with a GO bond starting in 2029. And, clearly, we can't figure what the rates are going to be. One of the things I have always liked about the GO bond is everyone in the district pays on it. I'll be very upfront. I don't have sewer, and I am on a well. I should probably make a donation to the district. But that said, people who have been here for a very long time and tend to be low income, living on Social Security, have lower valued homes than the people who have bought a new $3 million house on the edge of the ocean. And so it's fairness in not everything is the same kind of fairness, but in terms of the ability to contribute to the system. And as I said when we did the first GO bond, the folks who have lived here the longest were paying into a crappy water system and spending days without water and all kinds of terrible things, inadequate fire systems. They were paying in their own way too. And so I think that I would like to get the idea into the mix and have it kept in the mix as a point of discussion. Lou, I hear a
The
comment.
GO bond that we all paid into and finally paid off before we bought out Citizens was for the sewer and not the water.
Okay,
And see, that's why
That's-
Citizens made improvements. Citizens did not have the community to approve their raising of rates. They had the PUC approve their rates. And it wasn't until we ran out of water in some of these fire hydrants that we were able to convince the PUC that there was a problem
that's right.
with
That's right.
Citizens. They kept giving Citizens more money, and Citizens never invested it in the system. And when we bought out the system in 2003, we bought out everything they owned, everything they
That's
put in
right.
the ground and everything. And so, the fact that they had wells at the airport, they paid for the installation of that equipment, and that we bought and paid for.
That's it.
And there's no
And
federal.
another reason I
involvement.
like long-term bonds or loans just in general is that some of the infrastructure we're putting in is good for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I don't think that has to all be borne by the current residents.
Right.
So if you have a long-term payment plan that pushes payments into the future for future people moving into the area who will benefit from all the work, you know, current people do. So I think that's a fair thing. I like to see is spreading it out to future people too.
Okay. So we've got some good ideas. Alex, did you get a copy of Greg's sheet?
Yes?
You do have one.
Thank you.
I think there's some, I think we should pay attention. I like the part about don't assume growth. We thought we were going to have more growth than we have had when we were doing some rate, connection charge calculations, and the economy hasn't been that friendly for this, so I think there's some very well thought out, as always, comments in here. Do we have any more comments from the board? Have we given adequate direction to Alex and to Clemens on this?
So I've heard some direction. What I'm wondering is, time-wise, we're looking at, December is most likely not gonna happen much. And we're very soon in January. I'm wondering if we should, one time refer this to the finance committee so that we get a little bit more focus on actually the structure. What do you think, Alex?
I think it could hurt. I mean, what I'm hearing is there's some notion that, you know, that a partial usage charge may be something that's preferable because it can help reduce the charge for folks who are using less. People pay, you know, partial fixed, partial volumetric, so there's some balance there. And it would be good, we could run a few scenarios by the finance committee. What if it's 50-50? What if it's 2/3 fixed, 1/3 usage? And kind of get a little input on what your preference might be. And I think that would be good too. We can go, hey, here's what it looks like with charges by meter size, and show you some concrete stuff and get a little more honing for what's gonna come back to the board. I think that's a very good idea.
And you think we should do that in what, given the holidays and everything, early January?
Yeah, in January, in advance of the, what is it, January 16 meeting?
Okay.
So, I guess it needs to be a week and a half before that.
Sounds good.
Early January.
Okay, good. Moving right along then to new business. Review and possible action concerning receipt of fiscal year 2018-2019 audit. And after the introduction, I see we've got a blue slip.
Thanks, Kathleen. So we received the audit for fiscal year ending June 30, 2019. We have Ahmad here to present the audit, and Peter is here to also answer any questions that would be addressed to Montara's financial side. So this is really a receipt of the audit, so the board should acknowledge receipt. We need to file with State Standard Poor's, IBank, and First Republic, and that's really the action we're requesting to direct staff to send the copies to the relevant agencies. With that, I would like to ask Ahmad to tell us what the auditor found last fiscal year.
Thank you. My name is Ahmad Garaibe. I am the partner in charge of the audit of the district. The scope of the audit is to ensure that the financial statements are fairly stated. It is a process that we typically split into 2 or 3 phases. We come in here in an interim phase in which we look at the controls, and then you process receipts, and then you process billing, disbursements, contracting, payroll, controls as it relates to financial transactions basically. And then we come back out final, and it's a process of confirming the balances that are reported on the financial statements, and then at the end we issue an opinion on the fair presentation of the financial statements. Please to let you know that it was a clean opinion. We had no exception with respect to the audit and no adjustments. The management has been very helpful. You know, it's a process in which we confirm balances with third parties, and they've been very helpful in facilitating that process and ensuring that we get all the information that we needed, whether internal or external. That's pretty much it. We had no other adjustments, and we had no internal control findings. Effectively, the numbers that you guys were talking about just right now are reflected on the financial statements in terms of the reserves and all that. I know that there were some public comments or questions about the financial statements, if I can get that really quick. So, you know, in common with local governments, over the past 3 or 4 years, all local governments are now required to report what they call a pension liability. Pension liabilities reflect an amount that you owe to your employees after they retire, you know, throughout the pension benefit period. And in the past, it was reported basically if you make the required contribution, which is kind of like a smoothing of the payment of that pension payment, it wasn't reported there as a liability. The accounting standards changed. So some of the comments were about some of the assumptions and the dating of the information. I know there were some comments in there with respect to the fact that, some of the numbers were basically taken as of 2017 or 2018, and the reason behind that is most of these pension plans, whether with CalPERS, in your case it's PARS, it has to be audited. I cannot rely on numbers that are given to me by somebody else. I gotta get those numbers audited by somebody else. So the Accounting Standards Board allowed the backdating process in there, in which these numbers are basically 2018 numbers, but they are reflected on your 2019, just to smooth out the logistics behind reflecting these numbers in there. So some of them are 17, some of them are 18. One of the most sensitive discussions that we see always with many of our clients is when calculating that pension liability, there's a discount rate. Basically what you do is you take future expected payments, it's based on life expectancy, and you discount them to today's dollars. And the discounting process effectively is 6.5% is the most conservative, which actually is at the district here, to 7.5% is where the most liberal were. CalPERS, which has about 5,000 employers participating in their pension plans, uses 7.15, I believe, in the current year. So your rate is actually more conservative than other rates. And again, you're not invested with CalPERS. Obviously, CalPERS is a lot bigger. So this will answer some of these questions with respect to the discount rate. It's not the current discount rate. It's not the current bond rates or investment rates, because you're not going to pay those pension liabilities tomorrow. It's based on life expectancy, so it could take up to 60 years until these pension liabilities are paid. And if you look at the stock market performance over the past 30 or 40 years, it's been like 8 or 9% if you average the last 30 or 40 years. So that's how these assumptions are derived. It's in common with basically assumptions that, almost all local governments in the United States pretty much follow the same types of assumptions with respect to pensions. One item in there is that over and above the audit, there is a letter that we typically send out with the audit that basically tells you what our responsibility is, what the scope of the audit is, which is basically the numbers that you see on these financial statements are real numbers. And we call out your attention in there as that there are estimates in there and actual results may vary. You just never know what's going to happen. So I believe one of the notes in there, or one of the sentences, was referencing a note to the financial statements that specifically talks about the estimates of the pensions, and I think we made an error in there. We called it note 7 as opposed to note 8. It is a letter, so it definitely can be corrected, and we'll send a revised letter over there. And with that, I hope I answered all the questions, and I'll be more than happy to take some.
I have another question.
Yes.
In your letter, you say that the effectiveness of the district's internal control is not included, and also that the compliance is not included. Have you done audits where you actually do a check on the effectiveness of the district's internal controls?
Yes, so the audit standards out there, they have various types of audit opinions. And the main thing that we're doing here is when the district is telling you this is how much reserves we have and this is how much cash we have. That's the main scope of the audit, is just ensuring that these numbers are reported to you. And obviously unrestricted reserves is one of the most significant items in there, is accurate. Our job is not to opine, so the opinion is on the fair presentation of the financial statements. But we're not contracted to audit the internal control. However, our audit standards does require us to look as to how you accumulate that information, including your billing, including your payroll, including your contracting, vendor-related expenses. So we did look at the internal controls, and we are required to report to you whether we noted significant deficiencies in the internal controls, and we noted none. But did we opine on the internal control? Was that our objective in performing this audit? It was not. Our objective was to make sure that these financial statements are fairly stated. But then again, we did look at it, and that's what the letter does say in there, is that we didn't opine on the internal control, we opined on the financial statements.
Craig?
Yeah. Thanks for trying to explain that. And thanks for admitting to that typo. I'll note that I found 2 typos in my own notes while I'm sitting here reading them, so you know,
Nobody's perfect.
it happens all the time. My concern about the dates of the actual actuarial evaluation and reference date on pension liability, if I understand your explanation, you're saying you're downstream in workflow from other agencies auditing themselves, even though it's 2 years back. Now, my hope was, since we have to pay for and conduct an actual evaluation every year, why not get it current? Why not just do 2019 right now and get current? Now, that would be more conservative than the other agencies out there. Everybody takes advantage of this 2-year delay because it shows less of a problem. So my question now that you told me is it possible to speed up? Or is it not possible to speed up?
So the pension liability is a net, which is basically payments that you are expected to pay minus investment balances. I believe is located with PARS.
Correct.
And my audit standards tells me you gotta tell PARS to get your share audited. And it's an independent auditor. It's not themselves that are auditing themselves. It's an independent auditor regulated by the Board of Accountancy that opines on the fair presentation or the actual investment balances that is deducted from that pension. The logistics behind that, you know, if you look at CalPERS or PARS or any of those, until these things that gets done, it will take a while. So frankly speaking, in my history, I've never booked a liability that is not as of current today's date. But with respect to pension, the Accounting Standards Board, Governmental Accounting Standards Board, did give that exemption in which you can backdate it a year or two so that all these logistics are resolved because the information is not here. Information is with PARS. And I can't rely on what PARS is saying. I gotta get PARS to get their auditor to opine on these financial statements and look at the assumptions that they did over there. So that's why the backdating was created only for pension. It never happened before. It's the first time that GASB allows this to happen. It's because of the logistics are kind of hard to get it as of today's date because there's so many participants out there.
And then just a final comment on the rates of return. You see the same thing in Sanitary County. When I looked at their financials, you may not know this, but they have $1 billion of unfunded pension liability at the county. They have it broken out in 4 buckets, so it's hard to see. And if you look at the sensitivity analysis, they're a real liability because they're assuming 7.15% blended rate across several funds. Their real liability is somewhere between $3 and $5 billion, and again, that's 2 years out of date. So everybody wants to not report current. We are in the favorable position of being positive. And so I was just thinking, why not catch up now while things are looking good? But if it's a workflow impossibility, you can't ask for it. But I would ask that those rates of return be considered because the math just doesn't add up. It talks about a rate of inflation, which is, geez, I can't remember the rate. But it ends up yielding rates of 2.81% on cash investments when even the Schwab Money Market Fund, which includes some CDs, is only at 1.55%. So the rates that are in our statements there are clearly unrealistic. If you were to say that the rate of inflation is added to those real rates of return, we're not going to get that kind of yield. You know? So I think that is going to take some continued attention. And just for reference, while those are point-in-time rates, they also match the 10-year rates that Sanitary County is using, so they're not way out of whack. So just a heads up, pay attention to those rates of return because they're not realistic right now. Thanks.
Jim, you had a question.
Yeah, Ada and Peter, we have, I believe we have a couple of employees on CalPERS as well as PARS. Are those CalPERS funded liabilities included in this report?
They are not. They are, I don't think that, I'm sorry,
It's
Peter,
also
maybe you
usually
can correct me over there.
I believe what you're discussing is the 457 plan that is administered through CalPERS. The pension plan, that's a defined contribution plan. So that is, the district is a participant in, but it is not a DB plan, meaning that over the long term, this individual, the employee, is going to receive a pension over their lifetime.
Could you explain that again? I don't understand what you
Our CalPERS 4.7 plan is a defined contribution plan in which the district contributes 7% of employees' gross wages to that plan, but it is not a defined benefit plan. Defined benefit plan would be a pension plan. A defined contribution plan meaning all the contributions put in by the district will be paid out to an employee over a period of time.
Another way of saying that is there's no risk in the defined contribution plan. So there's no note to the financial statements requiring disclosure of that.
We have a disclosure in there, but it's just it's simply stating that we administer this plan for the employees.
Like a 401k.
It's a
Exactly.
it's the equivalent of a 401k for municipalities.
Okay, thank you. But it is through CalPERS.
Correct.
But there is no risk, and that's why it's not on the report.
Okay, go, thank you.
Okay. Any more comments, gentlemen?
So just to add, the pension liability, I mean, in total, I mean, if we're talking about a couple $1 million in reserves over there, with respect to this district, it's not significant. I believe it's like $90,000. There's a disclosure about sensitivity in there. If you add 1% discount, remove 1% discount. So it's not a big number in relation to the other numbers that are reported on the financial statements.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing as far as the district has had the opportunity to reduce contribution rates, and you guys have chosen not to. For a while, a lot of the municipalities were getting in trouble because they did reduce those rates when times were good, and now they find themselves in these huge $3 billion holes that they're going to have a hard time getting out of. So the district's plan is still in its infancy, less than 5 years old, but we're doing a pretty good job of not going into the negative.
Okay, we need to acknowledge receipt of the annual audit for the period ending June 30, 2019, and direct the general manager to send a copy to the County of San Mateo, the state controller, the Standard & Poor's, post on the district webpage, and to make copies on file available to the public. So we have acknowledged, do we need a motion on this to acknowledge it, or do we all say, hey, we heard it?
I think that's good enough.
Okay, and please, send a copy to the County of San Mateo, the State Controller, Standard & Poor's, and post on the district webpage, and make copies on file available.
Thanks, we'll do that.
That's good direction.
Yeah. Very clear, okay, thank you,
Thank
you,
you.
gentlemen.
Thank you.
Review and possible action concerning UC Davis Bodega Marine Center permit for scientific ocean current, for the scientific ocean current monitoring project.
Thanks, Catherine. I won't repeat the title. I think this is actually somewhat fascinating. We are hosting since quite some time high-definition radar units that are used for scientific research out here at the office property that's really down below at the ocean front here at the bluff. And so our units are part of a similar radar unit system that's installed, particularly around San Francisco Bay, also a little less dense around the California coastline. And these radar units are monitoring ocean currents in real time and helping to understand regional current patterns. California Coast Guard is actually a search and rescue mission. This was originally installed by Jim Pettigrew from the Rumber Tiburon Center, and I remember when he was here, that was during the time of the America's Cup or before, and he actually gave us a link to an app that is developed out of this data that the sailors were using at the time. So it simply shows the currents in real time. So you can download an app, and that is actually only applicable for San Francisco Bay. So our data isn't finding its way into this app, but you can really look at currents, and that's done through this project. Jim Pettigrew went to Australia to set up the same system over there and handed the responsibility to the Rumber Tiburon Center, They're asking to extend the agreement that we're having with them. We're now looking at a 5-year agreement, and the recommendation is to adopt resolution of the Montara Water and Sanitary District approving and authorizing execution of permit for scientific ocean current monitoring.
I don't see any blue slips, new ones for this. Bring it back to the board. Gentlemen, do you have any comments? or
It's a good thing.
Sounds good to me, thank you.
It's a good
Good to
thing.
me.
Good.
So
Okay.
So moved to adopt.
Moved by Rick, seconded by Scott. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion carries.
Thank you for looking
And I think we're doing, you know, it's nice to be on the edge of the ocean and help people make use of it for public health and safety. Review of MWSD's receipt of Association of California Water Agency Joint Powers Authority President's Special Recognition Award.
Thanks, Catherine. So this is the 4th Special Recognition Award from Aqua JPIA. We actually changed in 2013 from the prior provider to Aqua JPIA, and it has really helped us quite a bit. At the time, we had an issue with our workers' comp rate, and that was due to some claims that were made in years prior. And those always remain, so these claims are essentially marks that are staying for a number of years, I believe 3 years. So we were able to reduce the, so first of all, we were able to reduce the losses, and I think that it actually has to do something with Aqua JPIA because they're very much more actively working with us together than the prior provider. They're a subsection, of course, of the Association of California Water Agency. And so our experience modification factor that is applied to this to essentially determines what we're paying dropped from 2.12 to 0.85 in 2019, and the new rate is going to be hopefully even lower. We may have that already. And so for comparison, in 2012 we spent $62,400 on workers' compensation insurance. In 2019 payments were $15,419.
Congratulations to you and to our entire crew.
Thanks.
Congratulations. It's quite an accomplishment.
And may the safety continue.
Yes, thank you. And that's it.
That's it.
Report, yes, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll have to frame that and put it on the wall. Maybe next to where all the certifications are.
We're kind of running out of space.
Well, we've got lots of wall
We've got the
space
ceiling.
somewhere. There we go.
Quit being good.
Okay,
Walk
review.
himself here.
Review and possible action concerning cancellation of the regularly scheduled meeting, and it looks like on new business it was somewhat misstated. Because it looks like we're considering canceling the meeting on December 9th and January 3rd. And we're going to talk about each one separately.
Yes, correct. So I think we had already the idea in a prior meeting to cancel the January 3 meeting.
Yes, some of us won't be.
And I think it's pretty clear that some won't be here.
Some may still be hung
Now, so the recommendation really is to cancel the January 3 meeting for certain, and then I can report that we currently don't have any urgent business for the December 19 meeting. We can hold the meeting, of course, but if there is a desire for the board to make a decision right now to cancel, then we can give everybody a heads up that they can take the time, take the evening off. Otherwise, if there should be urgent business arising, we would, of course, schedule a meeting. So if that wasn't confusing enough.
Well, I was looking at the budget schedule that had been created for Sam, because in past years, there were some serious concerns over Sam not getting the budget in time to the general managers, and then the other side of the story was, well, we got it to you, but you didn't like the way we sent it, and blah, blah, blah. So, the board members created a schedule. And one of them is that, Sam is supposed to be sending the 5-year CIP to the general managers, and also sending a proposed working with the general managers on a proposed budget, and this would be the mid to end of December. There's a SAM board meeting, and Sid, you're more than welcome to come, right, to anybody else, please, on Monday night. And I have asked to have, scheduled an operations committee meeting ahead of that, and I have asked to have the discussion on that schedule. I haven't heard back from the general manager at SAM, so I don't know what's going on, and I will keep you posted when I find out. But I would like this district, in any event, to be doing what we can to stick to that schedule. Some of us worked very hard on trying to get something that was fair to everyone and keep us on a prudent timeline for everyone's budgets. So. Okay, so January 3rd is a day off, and December 19th might be. Moving
So
right
as of right now, if I could restate that, our understanding is plan of record is we will not convene on the 19th unless something major comes up.
Unless something major comes up.
Right. For Sam, particularly. Okay, Sewer Authority Mid-Coast Side meetings, there is a meeting on Monday. And the budget is not on a meeting on Monday. So, other than that, we've been getting along well and treating each other well, and things have been getting fixed. Nothing exciting, we're not.
There wasn't anything exciting.
Is
That's on the
this
report.
the SAM report?
That's the SAM report.
Any update on the, or should this be closed session, of the general manager's search, or? You don't-
There's nothing to report.
Okay.
What about the consultant?
Nothing to report. He has been, well, it's public session, he has been, Half Moon Bay wants to pay him on month to month with the option to, stop paying him at any point in time, and it seems a little foolhardy to me when he's presented a whole long, remediation list of things that need to happen, and they need to happen in a certain order, but Half Moon Bay, for some reason, is unwilling to spend the money. Sid, you were talking about, not fixing things when they should be, and the additional costs that come later, and frankly, the consultant's costs are a result of a lot of things that weren't taken care of in the past.
Things don't get cheaper over time. I mean, you know.
They don't, and some problems, if they're not dealt with, get far more expensive, and so that's the problem. Actually, with the general manager, Keishan, we have a contract, an agenda item to increase Keishan to general manager of SAM instead of going out and looking outside. And so that will be on the agenda Monday.
I thought the consultant was gonna be the acting general manager.
Yep.
No.
That's been changed.
No, he never wanted to be, it was never part of his proposal. He said that there are too many specific duties and jobs for a general manager to do, and what he is doing is fixing what has fallen apart in the past that needs to be repaired so a general manager can be more effective. Because right now, a general manager is always trying to look over his shoulder to see what broke and get it fixed instead of doing the kind of long-range planning that they need to be able to do. Coast Community Council, I have nothing to report. CSDA,
We have not had a meeting at
Laughter.
Laughter since then.
Okay, attorney's report,
No report?
director's reports. General manager's report, I'm going to be really rude, Clemens, and jump in, but the mailer that you put in the billing statement is really nice. And if we had, maybe Christine, you could pull it out of the packet and show it, because it's,
Is this what you're talking about?
that's what I'm talking about.
The Christmas tree looks really nice out in front too.
So this will be in this month's water bill, as well as in next month's water bill. So this month, we're sending the bills to Montara folks, will receive it this month. And the January bill will go to Moss Beach. And so we're hoping that we're gonna have this on a regular basis now, sending out a brief newsletter with each bill.
Okay, any other questions, gentlemen, about what's on the manager's report? Okay, seeing none, future agendas. So you
It's
have-
really old business, but did you ever hear back from Chris Porter about the food waste pickup that was some gal proposed a few months back? She was gonna get back to you.
She was going to get back to me, and she's been pretty busy. I did get a very nice newspaper article, I think it was the Jerusalem Times that Greg sent to me, about some fellows in Israel who are taking trash, including food waste, and able to, I don't know, do something magic to it and turn it into what they call plastic. I'd like to know what it really is, but it's a reused material that doesn't require as much sorting and stuff. I thought that was very interesting. I did pass it on to Chris.
I just wanna say one thing, I did call Chris Porter this week about a discussion on Nextdoor, and our green waste and our future possible food scrap waste will go all the way to Gilroy to their Windrow facility. So anybody that thinks it's a whole lot greener, that's a lot of gas and a lot of union wages to get it up and down the highway.
Right, well, the board pretty much decided that we're going to have, there will be a change in state law, and they will be forcing us to make that kind of combined service.
Maybe we can wait till then.
So that was what our thought
Good.
was.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
But any time you want to go on Nextdoor and talk about the master gardeners and doing, if you want to work with us and do something on composting.
I'll do a demo if somebody wants.
Okay.
I think some people aren't aware of the different kinds of composting that are available, especially some of the things that even apartment dwellers do with,
Through Recology or
no,
home
no,
backyard
on their own.
compost?
Well, you can do backyard, or you can do.
Permaculture.
You can do the vermiculture stuff, so some people even do it in their kitchens or
Right.
washrooms.
Well, to be real honest, a lot of people do composting with their garbage disposal, and it all goes all the way down to Sam where it's composted.
Yeah,
Let's get our
well,
money's
that's-
worth then.
You just can't do it with anything
That's
else.
the most expensive place to, way to compost.
Okay, thank you. Not hearing much on future agendas, we will take a recess and convene in closed session.